Evelyn, 74, wakes each morning with quiet purpose. She stretches beside her sunlit window, slips into her walking shoes, and waters the roses she planted after her husband passed. Her neighbors admire her strength. Her family leans on her wisdom, but even Evelyn missed the first sign. 1 month before her stroke, her legs told the truth her heart hadn't yet heard. Could the same be happening to you? Let's begin with the first silent signal most seniors overlook, and why it matters now more than ever. 1. Sudden or recurring leg weakness. It began with something Evelyn almost dismissed, a moment of imbalance while walking from the garden to the kitchen. The sun was high, her watering can light, yet her legs felt heavy, as if someone had gently pressed pause on their usual rhythm. At first she chalked it up to just one of those days. But one day became 2, then 3. What she didn't know, what most seniors never suspect, is that sudden or recurring leg weakness can be the body's first whisper of a stroke, preparing in silence. Evelyn had always taken pride in her independence. At 74, she still lived alone in the house she and her late husband built together. She gardened every morning, cooked her own meals, and even hosted the occasional book club meeting with friends who admired how put together she always seemed. To them, Evelyn embodied grace after loss, strength in aging, and purpose that didn't fade with time. But beneath the surface she occasionally wondered, what if something happens and I miss it? She had heard about stroke symptoms before, slurred speech, confusion, face drooping, but nothing about the legs, and certainly nothing that would make her question the way she moved through her day. So when the heaviness returned the following week, while she climbed the back steps after a short walk, she shook her head at herself. Probably just tired, maybe a little dehydrated. That leg heaviness didn't come with pain. That's what made it so easy to ignore. It was subtle, inconsistent, and eerily quiet. Evelyn noticed it most in her thighs and calves, particularly when getting out of a chair, or after sitting too long. The sensation wasn't one of soreness or stiffness, like after a long day, but more like her legs momentarily forgot how to engage. A few times, she even braced herself on a counter or door frame without thinking. She was stable, yes, but not quite grounded. At night, she would reflect on her day in her journal, something she'd picked up after retirement to stay mindful. Felt off when walking again, she wrote. Not sure if it's real or in my head. This act of journaling, though she didn't realize it then, became her first step toward understanding what her body was trying to say. The breakthrough came when Evelyn's granddaughter, visiting from college, mentioned the way she'd seen her grandmother pause before taking the stairs. "You've been walking different," she said gently, her eyes full of concern, not criticism. Evelyn laughed it off. "I'm allowed a little wobble at my age, aren't I?" But the next morning, those words echoed in her mind. Walking different, that's what it felt like. But not like aging, more like something changed. She flipped back through her journal, noting the days she'd mentioned fatigue in her legs. 5 entries in a single month. That's when she started to wonder if something more serious was unfolding. What Evelyn didn't know, what many seniors don't, is that sudden leg weakness, particularly when isolated to one side or recurring without strain, can be a red flag for reduced blood flow to the brain. It's often mistaken for simple fatigue or muscle loss, but in reality, it may point to a transient ischemic attack (TIA), a mini stroke that often precedes a major one. Unlike other stroke symptoms, this one rarely feels dramatic. There's no alarm bell, no searing pain, just a shift in the body's rhythm, and it's exactly that subtlety that makes it so dangerous. Evelyn learned this after casually mentioning her journal notes to her doctor during a routine checkup. Her physician immediately scheduled a carotid ultrasound and a follow-up exam. Within days, Evelyn was on a preventive plan, tailored to her vascular risk, and she never experienced the full stroke that may have been coming. Evelyn now keeps a printed page on her fridge titled "Listen to Your Legs," not out of fear, but as a reminder of how close she came to missing something vital. That single sensation, what she first called heaviness, was her body waving a quiet red flag. She still journals daily, But now, she tracks her physical feelings alongside her emotions. Felt strong today, walking uphill, she'll write, or legs light, no ball. She's not obsessive, she's aware. It's not about panic, it's about presence. If your legs feel different, heavier, slower, weaker, pay attention, especially if it's new, or more noticeable on one side. If you find yourself reaching for support more often, or hesitating before standing, write it down. Watch for patterns, not just moments. Evelyn's story isn't rare, but her outcome, avoiding a full stroke, is the result of listening early. And it all started with her legs. Let's keep going. The next sign is even easier to miss, and more commonly brushed aside as just poor circulation. But in some cases, it's your nervous system sounding a quiet alarm. Let's talk about it. 2. Persistent tingling, or numbness in one leg. By the time Evelyn had started tracking the heaviness in her legs, something else had begun to settle in, quietly and persistently. It was a sensation she described in her journal as ants marching under the skin, mostly in her left calf, and sometimes up to her thigh. She would feel it most during quiet moments, watching the news, sitting with a book, or just lying in bed with her feet up. And though it didn't hurt, it felt wrong. This wasn't ordinary numbness. This was her body whispering something deeper. In part 1, Evelyn's awakening began with a subtle physical shift, leg heaviness that wouldn't leave. That experience didn't just open her eyes. It taught her to listen, not just casually, but actively. To sit with a sensation and ask what it might be telling her. This awareness became her foundation. So, when the tingling began, she was ready, not to panic, but to pay attention. It's easy to dismiss strange sensations in the legs, especially for older adults. A pinched nerve, a long day on your feet, even sitting the wrong way. But this feeling was different. It returned even on her calmest days. It crept in without a trigger, and crucially, it didn't affect both legs. That's what made Evelyn pause, and that pause changed everything. The tingling was always in her left leg, never both. That consistency caught Evelyn's attention. She began noticing how it would appear while she was still, not while she was moving. While watching television, she would find herself shifting her leg more than usual, trying to shake the sensation away. At first, she tried her usual remedies, stretching, adjusting her socks, switching to different slippers. Nothing made a difference. The tingling always returned. More telling still, some mornings, she'd wake with a dead leg, feeling on that side, as if she'd slept in an awkward position. But her sleeping habits hadn't changed, and her mattress was new. That's when she decided to write about it in her journal in detail: what time it appeared, how long it lasted, and whether it moved. Over 2 weeks, she documented 8 instances. That alone gave her a pattern. It wasn't random. It wasn't minor. What Evelyn didn't yet know was that this kind of one-sided tingling, or numbness, can be an early neurological sign. The body's vascular system may struggle to deliver oxygen-rich blood to certain parts of the brain, leading to sensory disturbances, not just in the face or arms, but also in the legs. For many seniors, these sensations are written off as neuropathy, sciatica, or even just age. But when they're persistent and localized, especially to one side, they can hint at something more vascular than muscular. Evelyn's realization came when her primary care doctor, after hearing about both her leg weakness and the new tingling, referred her to a neurologist. She underwent a non-invasive exam and a basic nerve conduction study. The test didn't reveal nerve damage, but her doctor wasn't satisfied. A follow-up scan of her brain showed subtle signs of reduced perfusion in the hemisphere associated with motor function on the opposite side. It was the kind of clue many might miss, but Evelyn didn't, because she had started to ask the right questions. As the weeks passed, Evelyn's confidence didn't come from a lack of symptoms. It came from understanding them, from documenting them, from realizing she had the power to notice what others overlook. She made a habit of checking in with her body 3 times a day: morning, afternoon, and before bed. Just a quiet pause, no tests, no panic, just a mindful moment to ask, what am I feeling in my legs today? This habit gave her more than data. It gave her peace. She no longer felt like aging was a slow slide into mystery. She felt like she was finally on her own side. To help track the numbness, Evelyn created a sensation scale. She used a simple one, 5 rating, 1, no sensation, 2, barely there, 3, noticeable but mild, 4, frequent and distracting, 5, severe or affecting movement. Each evening, she would jot a number in her planner beside the date. Over time, this scale helped her spot increases or decreases with surprising clarity. She shared this with her doctor, who noted how useful it was, compared to vague descriptions, like sometimes or a little numb. This simple act of numbering something gave Evelyn ownership. It transformed mystery into something she could monitor. Evelyn's newfound attention didn't just change how she saw herself, it changed how others saw her. Her daughter, once gently concerned, but unsure how to help, began texting each week to ask about her journal. Her neighbor, also in her 70s, started journaling her own back pain and fatigue patterns. After seeing Evelyn's habit, the awareness rippled outward. What started as a tingle in one leg became a way to open conversation about aging, not as something to fear, but something to understand. And in that space, Evelyn didn't feel alone. She felt empowered. The tingling hadn't gone away entirely, but Evelyn no longer saw it as a nuisance. She saw it as a signal, a living part of her body's intelligence. She still checked in with her doctor regularly. She still watched her blood pressure and made changes to her diet. But more than that, she watched herself, with attention, with kindness. And the tingling, it still comes, but so does her awareness, her response, her strength. Let's go deeper. There's another signal, one that wakes many seniors in the middle of the night, but few realize what it means. And it's not just a cramp. Let's explore it next. 3. Unexpected leg cramping during rest or sleep. The next sign arrived, not in daylight, but in the quiet hours of early morning, sharp, sudden, and without warning. Evelyn was jolted awake by a fierce cramp twisting through her right calf, stiffening her entire leg. She tried to breathe through it, massaged the muscle, shifted her position, but the pain lingered. The next night, it returned. Not during a walk, not after overexertion. It struck while her body was still resting, and like many seniors, she almost wrote it off as dehydration or age. But these nighttime cramps were part of a pattern she'd come to recognize. Evelyn had become more attuned to her body's quiet messages. The tingling sensations had taught her that subtle symptoms weren't just background noise, they were clues. Now these cramps were beginning to speak too. Evelyn added a new column to her nightly journal entries, labeled Night Disruptions. The leg cramps weren't every night, but they were regular enough to track. Some lasted seconds, some lingered for minutes. Sometimes, they left her calf sore the next day, like a muscle she'd overworked, but without the workout. What surprised her was how they appeared after peaceful days. No strain, no long walks, no unusual movement, and that's what made her curious again. In her journal, Evelyn described the sensation as a rope tightening from the inside. The cramps most often happened while lying flat, feet slightly elevated. Some nights it was just a twinge. Others, the pain was enough to leave her sitting up with her legs over the side of the bed, waiting for relief. Unlike the tingling or heaviness, this symptom brought clear discomfort. It interrupted her rest, left her wary of bedtime, and made her second-guess her sleep setup. She changed pillows, adjusted her legs, added a warm compress. Still the cramps returned. Evelyn noticed that they only affected one leg, typically the right, and only during rest. That specificity rang familiar. She returned to her earlier notes, seeing how these signs were stacking, all pointing in the same direction. What Evelyn didn't expect was how stillness itself could be the problem. In seniors, especially those at risk for stroke, nocturnal leg cramps may be a sign of reduced circulation or inefficient oxygen delivery to the muscles during low-activity states. When the heart rate slows and blood flow decreases, weakened vascular systems can struggle to keep up, particularly in the lower extremities. Evelyn discovered that even though her daily walks were consistent, her nighttime routine was more sedentary than she thought. She'd spend evenings reading or watching television with her feet propped up, legs bent, or tucked beneath a blanket. This position, repeated nightly, reduced optimal blood flow just enough to make her body speak up, in pain. Stillness, ironically, had become a trigger, not because she was doing something wrong, but because her body was trying to adapt to a deeper issue. Evelyn didn't want fear to guide her evenings, so she used her curiosity, her new tool to reframe her bedtime habits. She introduced a gentle, mindful stretching routine before lying down, focusing on her calves, ankles, and thighs. Not a full workout, not a chore, just 3 minutes of circulation-focused movement, paired with slow breathing. She also began alternating her sleeping position, placing a pillow beneath her knees, or gently elevating her legs with a soft wedge. Within a week, the intensity of the cramps had lessened. Within 2, they nearly stopped, but she knew better now than to think they were gone. She knew to listen. The real shift wasn't just in Evelyn's legs, it was in her mindset. What had once felt like isolated discomfort now fit into a map. She saw her body as a landscape of signals, not random, but rooted in something real. She began printing out her journal pages, using colored pens to connect entries, red for cramping, blue for tingling, yellow for weakness. The visual pattern shocked her. Most of the symptoms occurred on her right side. Most happened at rest, most clustered around late evening and early morning. She shared this map with her doctor, who used it to adjust her medication schedule and refer her to a vascular specialist. Without that map, her cramps may have been dismissed as age-related or dietary. With it, they became a crucial clue. There was something else. The cramps changed how Evelyn trusted herself. Each time she caught a pattern, each time she acted early, her confidence grew. She no longer brushed symptoms aside, or felt ashamed for bringing small things to her doctor's attention. The cramps, once a disruption, became a source of empowerment. They helped her realize that pain wasn't always the problem. It was often the message. She also found new compassion for her body. No longer at war with its changes, she began speaking more gently about what she felt. When friends complained of similar issues, she didn't just nod. She asked questions, encouraged tracking, shared her scale system, and that's how the cramps, sharp and unwelcome, became a quiet thread in the tapestry of her healing. The nights were quieter now, not because the symptoms had vanished, but because Evelyn had tuned into them. Her journal remained her most trusted companion. Her evenings were now lined with soft rituals of stretching, breath, and reflection. The fear of pain had been replaced with a readiness to respond, and it all began with one sharp cramp, one night when her body refused to stay silent. But there's another sign, one that doesn't hurt, one that changes your skin before it touches your nerves. Most seniors see it, brush it off, and move on. But Evelyn, she had learned to stay and watch. Let's look at that next. 4. Discoloration or temperature changes in one leg. It was subtle at first, just a faint difference Evelyn noticed while moisturizing after her evening bath. One leg, the right, always seemed a little cooler to the touch. And the skin, under certain lighting, looked slightly duller, even tinged with a faint bluish tone. She assumed it was poor lighting, or a trick of her aging eyes. But when she started checking more consciously, the difference became clearer. Her left leg was warm and rosy, her right, cooler, less vibrant. She had learned to trust her body's whispers by now, and this was a new one. With her experience tracking leg weakness, tingling, and cramping, Evelyn had become deeply attuned to the rhythms of her body. The once dismissed sensations had become signposts. She no longer viewed her health passively. Instead, she engaged with it daily, through mindful attention, journaling, and gentle rituals. The cramps had taught her that pain could carry purpose, but now the changes were even quieter. No pain, no pressure, just difference. A difference that wouldn't go away. She had come this far, not just by noticing, but by learning to trust her noticing, and that trust is what brought her to this next revelation. Evelyn began checking her legs each morning and evening. After showering, she would compare the skin tone and feel the surface of each calf. At first, the color difference seemed too minor to mention, but one day, she held a mirror behind her knee and noticed the small bluish marbling around the veins in her right leg. It wasn't swelling. It wasn't painful, but it looked different. She started recording the room temperature and the time of day when she noticed the change. She kept track of how long the discoloration lasted. Often, it was after periods of prolonged sitting or during cooler evenings. Her right foot would feel colder than the left, and her slipper would take longer to warm it. This pattern brought a new level of awareness, not just to how her legs felt, but to how they appeared. Changes in skin color or temperature in just one leg can be early signs of vascular irregularities. In Evelyn's case, the colder limb was likely receiving less blood flow. The subtle bluish tone, often missed or written off, can point to underlying circulatory stress, especially in seniors with other risk factors for stroke. These signs are often passed over as cosmetic or environmental. But Evelyn had already trained herself to question the dismissible, and so, she documented again. She drew outlines in her journal, shading in parts of her leg where discoloration was most visible. She noted when it faded, how quickly it returned, and what she had been doing before it appeared. Her doctor later praised these notes, not just for their thoroughness, but for catching a sign that rarely triggers concern in time. Rather than panic, Evelyn built a new habit: morning leg checks. Each day, as she dressed, she paused for a moment with one leg crossed over the other. She would gently press the skin, observe the color, and feel for warmth. No judgment, no fear, just presence. She paired this ritual with a deep breathing practice, allowing her nervous system to stay calm and grounded. It was 5 minutes, sometimes less, but in those 5 minutes, she felt more connected to her body than she had in decades. This practice didn't just track symptoms, it created a moment of stillness, of gratitude, of self-respect. She was no longer waiting for something to go wrong. She was staying close enough to notice when it did. These visual changes, small as they were, led Evelyn to her most profound emotional shift yet. They reminded her of how easily women, especially aging women, are conditioned to look past their own discomfort, to downplay what they see. A bruise? Just clumsy. A chill? Just the house. But these thoughts, while familiar, were no longer welcome in Evelyn's home. She replaced them with a different language, one of observation, not dismissal, one of tenderness, not neglect. As she shared her morning routine with her daughter and a few friends, something surprising happened. They started doing it too. Her quiet ritual became a shared one, a conversation starter, a source of connection. What Evelyn gained in this phase wasn't a fix, it was confidence. Confidence that she could catch what mattered, that she didn't need permission to care deeply about her health, that her body wasn't betraying her, it was inviting her to pay attention. The visual and temperature changes became less frequent over time as her circulation improved with new routines. But she still checked, still stayed close, not because she feared the symptoms would return, but because the ritual had given her something far more lasting than any diagnosis: peace of mind. With so much already achieved, tracking sensations, reshaping habits, facing fears, Evelyn had arrived at a place of deep trust in herself. The kind of trust that grows not from certainty, but from presence. From showing up to her body every day, just as it is. She had moved from passive aging to conscious living, from reacting to responding, from fear to gentle observation. These final signs, the ones in her skin, her temperature, her texture, were not just warnings. They were invitations to slow down, to listen, to care. And as Evelyn stood at the mirror one morning, gently pressing the warm arch of her foot into the soft rug, she realized she hadn't just prevented a crisis, she had reclaimed a relationship with her body, her voice, and her life. There's one more sign left, one more subtle shift, that too many seniors ignore, until it trips them up, literally. It's not pain. It's not numbness. It's something deeper, something that changes how we walk through the world. Let's look at that now. 5. Unexplained trouble walking or balance issues. It wasn't a stumble that made Evelyn pause. It was the way her body moved just before it. She had stood up from her chair, reached for a book on the shelf, and for a brief moment, her right foot dragged, just slightly. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't dizzy. It was unfamiliar, controlled but disconnected, as if her brain and her leg had paused mid-conversation. That was the beginning of the 5th sign. Subtle changes in walking, balance, or coordination that many seniors overlook, dismissing them as aging, when in fact, they may signal something much more urgent. By this point, Evelyn had become a student of her own body. She had tuned in to its fatigue, tingling, discomfort, and temperature. Her journal was rich with patterns. Her routines had evolved. Her confidence had grown. She no longer feared listening. She welcomed it. Now something new was asking for her attention. Not pain, not color, but motion. A quiet disruption in how she moved through her world. This was more than a physical issue. It touched her sense of control, of presence, of independence, and confronting it would require everything she'd learned so far. The first time Evelyn noticed it, she was stepping out of the garden. The stone path was familiar, but her right foot didn't land where it should have. Not a fall, not even a trip, just a slight misstep. It happened again that week, while moving from her kitchen to the hallway. A gentle sway in her stride, like her body forgot to stabilize. She wrote about it that evening. Noticed a shift again in my right foot, almost like my balance dipped without my permission. It wasn't constant, but it was new. And as with everything else, Evelyn chose not to dismiss it. She began noting her walking patterns, where the issue appeared, what time of day, whether she felt mentally sharp or tired. She noticed it happened more often, when she had been sitting for longer periods, or when she stood quickly, or when she was carrying something in her hands. Each moment of imbalance, no matter how minor, became a clue. And through that lens, Evelyn didn't feel anxious. She felt empowered. Changes in balance or coordination, especially when limited to one side, can be early neurological signs tied to reduced blood flow in the brain's motor control centers. These symptoms often manifest before any dramatic stroke signs appear. They're not always sudden. Sometimes, they're as quiet as a missed step, a slow turn, or a subtle hesitation when rising from a chair. For Evelyn, the change was less about falling, and more about feeling unsteady. She began using her hallway mirror to observe her walk, watching the position of her hips, her knees, and the arc of her foot as it stepped forward. She noticed her right foot didn't lift quite as high. Her right knee bent just a bit less. It was symmetrical in appearance, but not in sensation. This kind of internal discrepancy, she realized, couldn't be ignored. Rather than avoid movement, Evelyn restructured her home to observe it more safely. She cleared space in the hallway, and added small guide points, colorful floor tiles, a wooden dowel along one wall, to practice walking straight lines with visual feedback. She added a full-length mirror at the end of the corridor to see her posture and form. Each morning, she spent 5 minutes walking back and forth, barefoot, taking note of which leg she favored, where she hesitated, how her balance shifted. This wasn't physical therapy, it was personal awareness, a conversation with her body. Over time, this space became more than just a test zone. It became a ritual, a way to reconnect with her physical self, and maintain trust in her stride. Of all the signs, this one struck Evelyn deepest. Her walk had always been part of her identity, graceful, steady, self-reliant. The idea that it could change without warning frightened her in a way the other signs hadn't. But fear didn't stay long, because Evelyn had already cultivated a mindset of response, not reaction. She realized her balance was more than physical, it was symbolic, a metaphor for how she met life's challenges. Her ability to stay centered, despite uncertainty, to step forward without seeing the entire path. So she leaned into that truth. She began including affirmations in her journal. My steps are mine, my path is steady, my strength moves with me. These weren't just words. They became a mantra she whispered each morning as her feet met the floor. By now, Evelyn had assembled a full spectrum of signs: weakness, tingling, cramping, discoloration, and imbalance. Each symptom was like a thread, once isolated, now woven into a tapestry of awareness. What began as quiet questions became confident habits. She no longer waited to feel off before checking in. Her body had become a partner, not a mystery, a source of information, not fear. These signs, when taken together, gave Evelyn a rare gift: proactive understanding. And while not every symptom led to a crisis, each one deepened her relationship with her health. Her transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. She had stepped into a phase of life not as a passive elder, but as a wise, intuitive guide for herself and for others walking this same road. Evelyn's final realization was perhaps the most powerful. Every step she took toward listening gave someone else permission to do the same. Her daughter began journaling her own symptoms. Her friend group, once hesitant to talk about aches and shifts, now shared daily insights and gentle accountability. Evelyn wasn't just healing, she was leading, and not by force, but by example. This last sign, so quiet, so easy to miss, had become the clearest signal of all, not of sickness, but of change, of possibility, of paying attention when the world would rather you stay silent. Evelyn didn't stay silent, and in that choice, everything changed. Let's close our journey by bringing everything together: how one woman's quiet noticing turned into life-saving wisdom, and how these same habits might light the path forward for you or someone you love. Evelyn's story reminds us that true strength begins with quiet awareness. By listening to her body, she reclaimed her peace, her power, and her path. You can too. Every small habit is a step toward clarity, confidence, and joy in your golden years. Start now. Your journey matters.